Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
again, right? Sure. If she's not, then whatever. Okay. All right. Carolyn Maloney. The Rules Committee will come to order. Before we begin, I don't see him here, or maybe he's on the line, but I want to wish Congressman Jamie Raskin a happy birthday. And I know there's a lot happening today, but we hope that he's able to find some time to celebrate. And what?
Is the mic?
Mic not working? Wait. You try. No. Hold on. Technical difficulty.
Could describe that for the whole Congress, Mr. Chairman, right now.
I'm giving it to you as a gift.
Yeah, newly muted. Parting.
All right, nothing now? Tell me, no? Was it working before? No. Hold on. All right. What do you think? No? Well, where's the name on it? They can't.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. Can you, does this one work?
No, we can hear it, but they can't.
Yeah,
hear
they
it.
can't. It's over here.
Can we put subtitles? They can read it.
What do you think? All right, what do you think? Okay, 1 second, okay. Yeah. How's that? Better? No? Is it, what, is this, but no? All right. I'm sorry, yeah, well, whatever. We don't need this recorded for history anyway, so, all right. Let's try one more time. The Rules Committee will come to order. And before I begin, again, I want to wish my colleague, Congressman Jamie Raskin, a happy birthday, and I hope he finds some time to celebrate today. Now, today we're going to consider a few measures. One is to prevent conflicts of interest in federal contracting. One, to ensure all VA healthcare employees have collective bargaining rights. And one, to improve law enforcement's response to mental health-related cases. First is S-3905, the Preventing Organizational Conflicts of Interest in Federal Acquisition Act. The long and short of this bill is that we need to strengthen our federal contracting laws to root out conflicts of interest. Look no further than a recent investigation by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, which found that McKinsey & Company, a prestigious consulting firm, was advising the FDA's oversight work of pharmaceutical companies. At the same time, they were helping Purdue Pharma to sell more OxyContin. Conflicts of interest like this are not a new issue, but it is clear that more needs to be done. The American people ought to have faith that their tax dollars are being spent wisely on contractors who are working in their best interest. And this bill will help increase impartiality and integrity within the federal consultant and contractor system. Second, we have H.R. 1948, the VA Employee Fairness Act of 2021. Many VA health care professionals, including nurses, physicians, and dentists, serve our veterans day in and day out. Yet they don't have they don't have the ability to negotiate better workplace conditions. The VA Employee Fairness Act expands full collective bargaining rights to all VA medical workers. It will help VA facilities recruit and retain top talent, ensuring that our nation's veterans continue to receive high-quality care from empowered, hardworking professionals. We'll also consider S4003, the Law Enforcement De-Escalation Training Act of 2022. Right now, frankly, police officers are being called to the scene for situations that they are not trained for. When someone is suffering from a mental health or behavioral health crisis, and the simple fact is that they often they have not been given the tools or training to handle these situations effectively. The Law Enforcement De-Escalation Training Act of 2022 is a bipartisan bill that trains police officers to respond to these kinds of mental health, behavioral health, and substance use crises, teaching them de-escalation tactics and helping them work with mental health professionals to link individuals to mental and behavioral health services in their community is something that we should all be able to get behind. These are good bills, and I look forward to the discussion. We're also going to take up a one-week CR extension. Talks, I'm told, and I'm reading, are moving forward. I wish they would be completed today, but we want to give ourselves a little bit of a cushion here. And so my hope is that, by within a week's time, or hopefully sooner than a week, we will have an omnibus ready to go. And so I just want to say one other thing, since I'm not sure how many more of these meetings that we're going to have, but I thought that I would just take a moment to make sure that we recognize our friend and colleague, Congressman Ed Perlmutter, who has served this Congress, has had for 16 years, and as we all know, he is not going to be coming back next session. He's moving on to other things. He's been an advocate for the people of Colorado's 7th District, where he's lived all his life, and he has been a loud advocate for the constituents he represents in Colorado's 7th District. He has deep roots and understanding of his district and of Colorado, and he has been, again, an incredible advocate for his constituents. He's been a leader on economic development issues, renewable energy issues, environmental protection issues, devoted so much of his life to uplifting scientific discovery and research in Colorado and around the country. In addition to being on the Rules Committee, he's served on the Financial Services Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions. He worked tirelessly to protect our financial system and expand economic opportunity for all. I don't know. I'm gonna ask you. I don't have any staff anymore. Well, this was not you, Ed. This is all from the heart. But he's been a leader in the House on gun violence prevention, and of course, none of us will ever forget, as long as we live, his advocacy for the Safe Banking Act. He has truly led that charge on this issue like no other member of Congress on any other issue. And I think that I speak for most of us when I hope to hell we can get it done and never have to talk about it again. But we're going to miss him, and we wish all the best. And I just want to say that in addition to all that I have just said, I mean, I think we all consider you a dear and treasured friend, and we're going to miss, seriously and genuinely going to miss you being here. I mean, you've always added a great deal to our committee proceedings. You have provided substantive discussion on some really challenging issues, but in addition to all that, we all like you, and so it's going to be sad to see you go. And I also want to say to my friend Carolyn Maloney, we want to wish you all the best as well. We thank you for your tireless service to this country and all the issues that you have worked on that are near and dear to my heart. But I wish you all the best, and I think we all do. But again, we want you to know how much we appreciate you and how much we value your friendship. With that, let me yield to my ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any comments he wishes to make.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by associating myself with your remarks about our distinguished colleague, Mr. Perlmutter, and our distinguished colleague, Chairwoman Maloney. Both of them have been a delight to serve with. Mr. Perlmutter's departure is widely celebrated, actually, and repeatedly. But in all sincerity, he's been a wonderful member to work with, and he even browbeat me into voting for safe banking eventually. I'm going to get another chance, yeah, I'm sure. And I'm, depending on the form in which it presents itself, happy to be of help. I think it's an important measure. And our two people that will testify on some pending legislation in a minute, again, I always like to point out, I think of that committee as historically a shirts and skins committee, but it also produced under the chairwoman, the ranking member's leadership, I think really significant legislation on postal reform that I know certainly benefited my district and I think benefited the country, and was a genuine tribute to both of their bipartisan skills in coming together and dealing with a knotty issue that we've been wrestling with for a long time up here. And I think both of you can be exceptionally proud of your work in that regard. During today's hearing, Mr. Chairman, we'll actually deal with a variety of issues. We'll, as I understand it, the law enforcement measure you referred to is actually in the rule itself, so we're not taking testimony on that. We've dealt with it before. We have two bills that we will be taking testimony on, and then, given your remarks, I presume that we'll be dealing with the CR at some point as well, so I want to make some remarks on that. The first bill I'll discuss is H.R. 1948. It's the VA Employee Fairness Act. The bill would make changes to federal laws concerning bargaining rights for employees of the Veterans Health Administration and would extend collective bargaining rights to include matters covering professional conduct or competence and the establishment or adjustment of employee compensation. Republicans on the Veterans Affairs Committee have expressed concerns that the legislation could result in unintended consequences that could put veteran safety at risk, in particular shifting questions of professional conduct or competence to collective bargaining could result in third-party arbitrators reviewing such questions rather than medical professionals, which is not a common practice in the private sector and could compromise patient safety. Our second bill, S. 3905, the Preventing Organizational Conflicts of Interest in Federal Acquisition Act, that bill would require the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council to revise the Federal Acquisition Regulation to update conflict of interest procedures and to update definitions, guidance, and illustrative examples related to specific types of organizational conflicts of interest. My Republican colleagues on the Committee on Oversight and Reform have expressed concerns that the bill is duplicative of existing law. I look forward to hearing from our witness today on both these bills and look forward to hearing their thoughts on the legislation before us today. Let me turn now, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to the CR, which you mentioned in your remarks. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the addition of an emergency item, which is a continuing resolution funding the government through next Friday. It's deeply unfortunate that this is where we are. Once again, the House is leaving until the last minute, something which could and should have been considered earlier, preferably through regular order. I understand that negotiations are ongoing, but the problem is they are not going on with House Republicans. The Senate and presumably the House Democratic leadership are going their own way in an unknown direction. The longer this goes, the more likely we are to fall into a year-long continuing resolution, keeping current spending levels in place instead of adjusting them to reflect our nation's current needs and priorities. That would be a bad outcome for everyone, but most especially for the American people. The House Appropriations Committee, I must express with some pride, being a member of that committee, passed all 12 bills out of committee before the start of the summer and adhered to regular order in doing so. By contrast, the Senate Appropriations Committee has not passed a single bill out of committee for 2 years. And once again, we're faced with the possibility of an omnibus appropriations bill drafted largely behind closed doors to satisfy the needs of the Senate. This is hardly regular order. It's no wonder Republican members of the House are frustrated. But it's equally frustrating that we are once again waiting until the last minute to do our work. When we passed a continuing resolution at the end of September, it was to keep the government open while negotiations took place. Yet here we are up against the deadline once again, and again taking up a continuing resolution. We can do better than this and should do better than this, Mr. Chairman. And frankly, we must do better going forward. With that, I yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments, and again, I think we all want to see an omnibus bill completed and come together, and I wish it were today. I'm reminded of that Christmas song, "I'll be home for Christmas, but only in my dreams." I hope that doesn't come through. So this is limited to a week, and my hope is that we can get our work done, and none of us, myself included, want to see a year-long CR, especially after all the work that has been done here in the House to put together some really good packages, but really good things in this package. In any event, we're going to begin with, where do I go here? We're going to begin dealing with S 3905, the Preventing Organizational Conflicts of Interest in Federal Acquisition Act. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony on S 3905. Chairwoman Maloney and Ranking Member Comer, we are delighted that you were here. I will recognize the gentleman from New York, Chairwoman Maloney, for her opening statement.
Before the Rules Committee, I want to join in your comments about Mr. Perlmutter's distinguished service. He is also the only member I know that can do a series of cartwheels, which he does every election night. And I don't think I ever passed a bill that he didn't call me up and say, we've got to attach safe banking to it. So he's absolutely right. It's a bill that's long overdue and needs to pass, and you did incredible work. And as a New Yorker, I must also congratulate Mr. Morelli. New York is so proud of his work here on the committee. I am here with my colleague. We work together on many things. I wish he would be that this could be bipartisan, this support for S 3905. It came out of the Senate with total bipartisan support, which is highly unusual, and really grew out of hearings that we had on the pharmaceutical industry, on the opioids. How did this tragedy happen that something that was so addictive got to the market under the headline that it was not addictive? And in our investigation, we found that there are some companies that really, mainly consulting companies, that have a business model of working both for the regulator and for the product at the same time. This is clearly an outrageous violation of a conflict of interest, but particularly when it comes to health care, when the regulator is supposed to be determining whether a product is safe or not, yet at the same time, the same people, it's not even different people in the firms, it's the same people working for the regulator, for the government, for hundreds of millions of dollars, and the industry for really hundreds of millions of dollars, trying to have it determined that it's safe when many times it wasn't safe, as we know, with the opioid crisis. So our bill basically says you can't do that. Work for one or the other. Work for the regulator or work for the industry, but don't work for the same at the same time. It is really dangerous to the health of the country. I think it's a very important bill. The fact that it came out of the Senate with a total bipartisan vote shows that the support they have. And we have our own bill in the House, 7602, but at this late stage, we want to just go with the Senate bill because it's very important and we want to pass it. And we found in our studies that in many times the exact same consultants advised both the FDA and the private sector clients, those that are pushing products onto the market. In this case, the consultant failed to follow the rules on disclosing these conflicts. Obviously, you're supposed to disclose it. They don't. Collecting millions of dollars from both the regulator and the private sector client. Now, in some cases, the FDA was not aware at all and did not know that they were working for the manufacturers of various drugs. Existing regulations refer to the conflicts of government contractors as organizational conflicts of interest, or OCIs. OCIs may exist when a contractor competing interests raise questions about their ability to provide impartial advice to the government. Avoiding OCIs is particularly important for consulting contracts where the government is paying for expert advice on sensitive matters. We found that this happened several times. It wasn't just a one-off, and it's a very, I think, serious situation for the health of Americans. This bill would make long overdue revisions to strengthening rules on the OCIs, which are found in the set of contracting rules known as the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or FAR. The rules on OCIs have not changed significantly since they were issued in the 1990s, despite major changes in government contracting landscape. These regulations set basic principles for avoiding and mitigating OCIs, but leave the details to be figured out by individual agencies. As a result, regulations across the government vary greatly, and some agencies, including the FDA, have not formally supplemented the FAR's OCI rules at all. So we should have uniformity. There is no uniformity, and certainly in that uniformity is stopping conflicts of interest of working for the regulator and the manufacturers or the drug companies at the same time. This bill would mandate that rules on OCIs are thoroughly revised with greater focus on conflicts that result from a contractor's outside work. For private and foreign clients, the new rules will also include standard contract clauses on OCIs that are crucial to set clear standards and ensure contractor compliance. I have a very long statement. I would like to put this into the record for all of you to review.
Without
and
objection.
read. But very simply said, especially in healthcare, we should not have the regulator, the consultants for the regulator, being the same consultants working for manufacturers, drug companies. And we know that many drugs have gotten to the market, most specifically opioids, where they said they were not addictive when they were clearly addictive. So we need more honesty and a stronger FDA. You can't be working for both at the same time. This bill stops it, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Comer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Let me begin by echoing everyone's sentiments about Congressman Perlmutter. We appreciate your service, and I just want you to know I'm lobbying for a rule change to allow you and Mr. Yarmouth to be able to play on the Congressional Ryder Cup next year as former members. So I'm working to get you back on that. And I, too, want to publicly thank the Chairwoman Maloney for all her great work and her service to the country. We've worked together on some bipartisan things, which is unusual for the Oversight Committee. Truly going to miss her. Tomorrow, I assume, is going to be our last committee hearing, full
It's our
committee hearing.
last committee hearing.
I have a gift I'm going to give the chair. My advice is hide it from the gentleman from Oklahoma. But
That means you're probably getting a bottle of bourbon.
Right.
but
I'm glad to share.
right. I really have enjoyed working with Chairwoman Maloney.
Same here.
Mr. Chairman, I oppose Senate Bill 3905 for the simple reason that it's unnecessary. Federal acquisition regulations already contain provisions targeting conflicts of interest, including examples of what would constitute a conflict of interest, as well as clauses agencies can add to contracts to address conflicts that may arise. This includes agency-specific situations. So it seems we're telling the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, the body responsible for federal acquisition policy, to do something it's already doing or it's supposed to be doing. As a result, this legislation will cause the FAR Council to do work it does not need to be doing. But they will surely feel compelled to produce something in the way of new regulations. That means it will become even more difficult for companies to do business with the federal government. And it's complicated enough as it is. There are already concerned companies, especially small businesses, are deciding not to do business with the federal government because it's just too difficult. Finally, Oversight Committee Democrats marked this bill up without any hearings with relevant agency officials or stakeholders. They may point to their report regarding one company and argue that was proof enough we need to legislate this already crowded space, as the chair just did, But you will forgive me if I don't consider a single case study a solid foundation for legislation impacting federal contractors. If there were issues with agencies enforcing existing conflict of interest requirements, then Congress needs to conduct oversight over that failure of our federal government, not rush to pass more duplicative laws. I think what we're seeing in financial services could possibly be a failure of agencies in charge with regulating from doing their job. So that's something that oversight should look into. There may be other anecdotes about conflict of interest, but let's be clear. No matter what we do, there will always be accusations of conflicts of interest. Republicans oppose conflicts of interest, but we also support responsible legislating. With this bill, the most likely outcome is unnecessary work and more complicated federal procurement process, not fewer conflicts of interest. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. I have no questions. Mr. Cole?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Torres? Mr. Eschenthaler? Mr. Perlmutter?
Well, since we're going to do a one-week CR, I assume we're going to have another meeting next week where I can really wax eloquent and
Absolutely.
defend myself against all attacks. Just to my friend Carolyn Maloney, we've been on financial services for 16 years. She's led our committee. She's been a stalwart on financial matters like no other, and she's passed a lot of legislation to protect Americans and consumers throughout the country. So thank you to Mr. Comer, who, the reason he wants me on the golf team is because he beats me on a pretty regular basis. So that's the only reason he wants to grandfather me into that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield. I do want to say that I do have two outstanding matters that I'm still working on. Obviously, one is safe banking, and hopefully I can add it to something. There aren't many more things, but add it to something. And then also, just to reiterate, I did file 3 bills on compensation for all of us. One I call the COLA, which is to bring us into parity with the judges, where we were in 2009, and then they kept going forward. As of January 1st, they'll be at $233,000, and we're at $174,000, because we have denied ourselves cost of living adjustments. You know, forget about anything else, but we've just denied that. Then there's one called the half a COLA, and I would let the appropriators on our Rules Committee know that's the one that I may try to do something with in the omnibus. My leadership's aware. That one says that we improperly denied ourselves a cost of living adjustment every other year under the 27th Amendment. And so we'll see what that is. And then we've got a couple paths involving a housing allowance. So I'm going to go out of here swinging. Hopefully I don't blow up too many things in the process. But that's one where I really do feel we have, you know, a lot of people say, oh, those members of Congress, they make too much money, all that sort of stuff. That, you know, carrying 2 houses, 2 homes, and with the inflation that we have all seen, what we've done in denying ourselves just a cost of living is wrong and demeaning to ourselves. And so I will try to do something with that in the next week. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Mr. Eschenthaler? Okay. Oh, you okay. Mr. Raskin?
Chairman, thank you for your kind words
I'm
about.
sorry. Hold on. No question. Okay, I'm sorry. Jamie, you weren't here. We all wish you happy birthday. So,
Yes, happy
Yeah, but
birthday,
thank you.
Jamie. Should we
Well,
sing
I
a song?
appreciate that, everybody. Chairwoman Maloney, I want to take the opportunity to salute you on your magnificent chairwomanship and the major impact you've had on so many pieces of legislation across the spectrum of, you know, what takes place in the Oversight Committee and in the Congress. And this bill is illustrative of that, and I'm a proud co-sponsor and supporter of it. And I think I will wait until next time to roast Mr. Perlmutter, if that's the appropriate thing to do, Mr. Chairman. And I will yield back to you.
thank you. Anybody else have any questions on our set? Mr. Morelli?
I don't have any questions, but I obviously wanted to join in birthday greetings to Mr. Raskin. Mr. McGovern had this fabulous birthday cake here, but since you're not here, we'll eat it in your absence and think of you. But I did also want to add my thanks to my dear colleague and friend from the New York delegation, the chair of the Oversight Committee. I was long an admirer of Carolyn Maloney before I had the chance to serve with her as I watched from afar in Albany in the state legislature, but it's been an incredible privilege and great to not only have you as a colleague, but to call you a dear friend. And I wish you all the best in future adventures. Thank you.
Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo the praise for Chairwoman Maloney and let her know that we've got her back on the ERA. We will not give up.
Good.
I yield back.
Anybody else have any questions for this panel? Ms. Maloney?
If I could say, I have great respect for my good friend, Mr. Comer, and he really made a lot of the bills that we worked on better with his ideas. But this bill is not complicated. It doesn't complicate anything. And I feel very strongly about it because we're talking about the directions coming from agencies about how to protect the lives of people. I'll just use the example. It could be any agency, but the FDA, when they are writing instructions about what a health product should be, whether it's safe or not, to have the same consultants, not only the same consulting firm, but the same people working for the regulator and the drug industry at the same time. And it's dangerous. So I think this bill is important. If the OCI was going to do something about it, they've had other organizations supposedly going to reform it. It just never happens because lobbyists come in and stop it. But this is people's health. Look at the opioid crisis. They wrote instructions out of the FDA that said it wasn't addictive, that it's not addictive at all. It's one of the most addictive drugs that has ever gone to the market. So I feel it's very simple to say, these are multi-billion-dollar businesses. Can't they just work for one? Do they have to work for both at the same time? This is not cutting their business opportunities. It's only saying you cannot work for the regulator and the industry at the same time. I would call that common sense personified. I would call it saving the health of American people. I am so dedicated to this bill, and I'm so frantic to get it passed because I feel that if it doesn't pass in this Congress, it's not going to pass in the future Congress because the power of the money and the drug industry or whatever industry it is stops this simple reform. It just says don't tell the regulator to go easy on the product because the product is paying the company 10 times more than the regulator is. So this is a very important bill, I think, for the health of America. And I am urging my friends and colleagues on both sides of the aisle to fight for this bill and pass it. Because why are we here if we don't save lives when we can save lives? This bill saves lives. And it doesn't cost money. We don't have to spend $1 billion. All we have to do is say, don't have a conflict of interest, don't work for the regulator and the manufacturer and the drug industry at the same time. That's it. I yield back.
Okay. Do you want to respond?
May I? Just briefly, 20 seconds.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the chair, but the laws already prohibit conflicts of interest in federal contracting. So
It's not working.
I yield back.
So thank you very much. We appreciate it. There are no other questions at this panel. You are free to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Which one? Did they call votes?
Yeah, there's so many.
You don't need to
Right.
do anything. Mine's from the, mine's just, where's the
Mine is a very serious thing.
I-
Say prayers, thank you.
That's fine, but you don't have to.
Okay.
Okay, all right, that's fine. But
All
you don't
right,
worry
so
about me.
we got to,
Leaving.
Without objection, we're going to recess.
Thursday about 1,
We have one, yeah.
or 1 o'clock. I
Yeah,
gotta-
we have one vote in a group picture, and then we'll come back, okay, after the picture.
The committee is in
Without objection, the committee is in recess.
Thank you.
bipartisan VA Employee Fairness Act. This legislation ensures important collective bargaining rights for all of the frontline healthcare workers who care for our veterans. As chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I've made veterans health care one of my top priorities, and I know that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle strongly support our veterans and the benefits they earn. And I actually see a number of your members that voted in favor of my PACT Act, and I'm grateful for that. This bill presents an opportunity to match words with deeds. The VA Employee Fairness Act will ensure critical protections for the healthcare workers serving our veterans. As a nation, we must invest in these frontline workers at VA hospitals. Of course, our veterans need modern, well-designed hospital and clinical buildings. These hospitals should be equipped with the latest, most advanced medical devices and equipment. VA healthcare is dependent on having adequate medical supplies. However, all of this means little without a well-trained workforce ready to serve our veterans. And that is why collective bargaining is vital. Frontline healthcare workers deserve the right to organize themselves. They deserve a right to have a voice. When something has gone wrong in a hospital ward, a nurse or a technician should be able to point this out without fear that they might lose their job or suffer other adverse consequences for speaking up. The nurse who somehow received the wrong amount on his or her monthly paycheck must have a way to point out the mistake and get it fixed. All of this sounds like common sense, and it is. And this is what collective bargaining is all about. My bill will bring parity to the federal workforce by ensuring full collective bargaining rights for all VA employees. Under current law, almost all federal employees have basic worker protections through collective bargaining. They can become members of a labor union. They have a way to raise grievances and seek redress. They are allowed to have the support of union representatives. And this has long been a part of the fabric of the federal workforce. But there is one glaring exception. Many of the frontline healthcare workers within VA hospitals and clinics are barred from collective bargaining. Title 38 healthcare professionals such as registered nurses, physicians, dentists, and physician assistants do not have the same rights as psychologists, social workers, pharmacists, licensed practical nurses who work side by side with them. And I will note that the same professionals at Department of Defense hospitals have collective bargaining rights. That's correct. A registered nurse has collective bargaining rights at DOD, but not a registered nurse at VA. This is the kind of legal contortion that needs to be fixed. This probably sounds arbitrary, and it is. A list was written up by Congress years ago, and depending on your specialty of nursing care or other occupation, someone taking care of veterans is either able to have full rights as an employee or not. And this only happens at VA healthcare facilities. This bill is co-sponsored by 218 of our congressional colleagues. The bill is strongly supported by organized labor as well as by Vietnam Veterans of America and the American Legion. The employees who are on the front lines of our nation's veteran health care deserve and need basic worker protections. A VA nurse needs to be able to ask that their pay errors be resolved. A doctor must feel empowered to raise medical safety concerns without fear or reprisal or retaliation. And without these protections, VA will continue to struggle to recruit and retain the best and brightest medical professionals that our country has to offer. And I fear that veterans' health and well-being will suffer as a result. In closing, I urge the Rules Committee to support H.R. 1948, the VA Employee Fairness Act. It represents the right thing to do for those who care for our nation's veterans. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Torres and Ranking Member Cole. I'm here today in opposition of H.R. 1948, the VA Employee Fairness Act. Unfortunately, I must oppose the bill because it would result in unintended consequences that put veterans' safety at risk. Many of you know that I come from a union family, so I'm not anti-union. I've always supported the rights of workers. However, I'm also a veteran and a United States Marine. The care for my fellow brothers and sisters in arms will always come before anything else. Now, I understand the goal of the legislation is to expand collective bargaining rights for medical providers at VA. However, I worry enactment of this legislation would put patient safety at risk. The crux of the issue is whether to give the unions the ability to grieve matters of personal conduct or competency, peer review, and pay. The union has complained that the secretary has invoked this provision to deal with questions like scheduling. However, this change would also allow a third-party arbitrator to second-guess the secretary's decision to discipline a doctor, a nurse, or a dentist. For example, this could happen when the secretary finds that a provider direct patient care or clinic competency is substandard. Those are the types of questions that should be reviewed by medical professionals, and the buck should stop with the secretary. We should not leave the discipline of medical professionals to an unaccountable third party. The Congressional Research Service has found that the bargaining over patient care is not common in the private sector. Major clinics like Mayo Clinic, Kaiser, Intermountain Healthcare, and the Cleveland clinics are all not unionized and do not allow for arbitration to be used over patient care. Neither should the VA. Now, I agree we need to do better to understand how the VA defines a matter of professional conduct or competence. But as I mentioned at the markup of this bill in May of last year, I would be happy to work with VA and their union partners to find common ground. However, we must preserve the Secretary's autonomy and responsibility for dealing with the patient safety matters. Unfortunately, the bill before us does not allow for a middle ground, and I believe it would compromise patient safety. Finally, it is telling that the pro-labor Biden administration did not endorse this proposal, and in their testimony on the bill stated there, and I quote, "many complex issues under review," end quote. If the VA believes this legislation is not ready, we should not listen and ask the same. We should listen and ask the same question. Now, I urge my colleagues to put veterans first and oppose the legislation, but I'm happy to answer any questions with that, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you once again for your testimony. It's my experience that whether it's classroom teachers or nurses, they're typically the ones that are the best voices for our children, children's rights, and patient care. At least that has been my experience. Chairman Takano, we have had long-term chronic issues with the VA and its service that it has provided to our veterans. I have been on some oversight meetings with Republicans and Democrats voicing concerns about accessibility to health care by our veterans. And I know that some of our nurses have come forward. Some of them had to use the whistleblower option because they're afraid to talk about, to be retaliated about the issues that they were bringing out that were so concerning about treatment of veterans, nurse to patient ratios, ratio issues, for example. Can you provide some background onto the issues associated with that, and how having a labor union, an organization that can help provide guidance to these employees and another layer of protection against retaliation, how would that better serve our veterans?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So let's first of all, I want to reiterate what this bill does. It brings Title 38 employees, or certain Title 38 categories of employees, into parity with Title V employees at the VA. So much of the VA employees already have the ability to collectively bargain and to be represented by a union when they have grievances. Let's be clear about what's at stake here. What's at stake here is not salaries or benefits or the ability to strike. All three of those abilities are already taken care of by federal statute, and no VA employee can do any of the three things that I just mentioned. Let's also recall that in 2017, the Congress passed a very aggressive VA Accountability Act, which made it much easier for VA to dismiss employees that posed a risk to our veterans. This bill does nothing to change any of those enhanced authorities, although I do think we need to revisit what happened, because I do believe the Trump administration behaved excessively in dismissing lower-level employees when the accountability bill was enacted. What this bill does, what my bill does, H.R. 1948, is it simply does a common-sense thing. It says that Title 38 employees should also be able to be represented, and that if they have a grievance against a VA action which violates VA's own policy, the statute or statute, that they should be able to do that, and they should not have an arbitrator, a decision by an arbitrator ignored, and that they don't have to fight this alone, that they have union representation to help them. So notwithstanding the assertions made by my esteemed ranking member, this bill actually, I believe, does not harm patient safety, but rather enhances patient safety, because it's about getting VA to adhere to their own policies and their own standards, and to give adequate voice to frontline employees at the VA.
Yeah, my main response to that would be, why would we, first off, no other major medical group organizes their docs, their nurses, dentists. Why? Because there is a professional review board that they can go before. The same thing with the VA. Now, if it is other things that we can work on, that job is ours as Congress with the VA. Our committee has oversight. Oversight, if our whistleblowers come to us, then we can actually argue on their behalf. Now, if it is a medical issue that maybe a doc, a nurse, a dentist, somebody has done something that's very incompetent, and they want to do an appeals process, they can do that. It's available to them. But with the professionals, we've always had a position that they did not fall under this, and it gives the secretary the power they need in the administration. Whether it's a Republican administration or a Democrat administration, they need to have the power. Because why? Because it's about the safety and the quality of services that we provide to our veterans. This is the largest medical provider in this nation. And we need to make sure that our secretary, whoever that might be, has the final say, and that's the reason why I think this is the wrong way to go.
I'm going to move on to our ranking member, but I just want to say, I know you said that Kaiser nurses are not in a labor union, but I do believe that
Some are in other places, but not
my
in the labor.
nurse is a member of AFSCME, and I will yield to Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank both our witnesses for being here. I like it a lot better when you're here agreement, but I never have any doubt about either one of you. I know you both think very much about putting veterans first. I am somewhat concerned, and I'll have some specific questions here, but the fact that the administration has not embraced this with a statement of administration policy does give me pause, because this is an administration that prides itself in being pro-labor, and I think this maybe has to do with the complexities. And I know we're here in a rush because we don't have a lot of time left on the clock, and sometimes that means maybe we bring things forward a little prematurely. But Mr. Boss, let me ask you, I understand there are legitimate concerns that the legislation takes a very broad approach. You sort of mentioned this in your remarks. And a more targeted measure, might prove more effective at accomplishing the majority's goal. Could you expand on what that would look
Sure.
like in your view?
Sure, when it comes to things like scheduling and all of those type things, the process, if it is not working, it is in our committee's purview to make sure it does work. So if there is a problem, if we bring that forward, I think we could sit down with the employees, we could sit down with the unions, we could sit down with the Senate, we could come up with if there's a problem. If also we notice that the secretary, if there's something wrong, we can bring them in before us. Using this to overstep and use someone who has no medical training whatsoever to come back in and second guess. Now, there may be issues that we can work on, like I said, scheduling, other things like that. For instance, one of the statements that was made in the opening remark was that someone, all of a sudden, their paycheck isn't right. Well, show me somebody who their paycheck isn't right that doesn't automatically have the opportunity to go to their immediate employer in the VA and go, hey, there's a problem with my paycheck, just like anyone else. And I think if we look at that, then I can remember back whenever I was in the Marine Corps and all of a sudden they had changed over to cash pay, that'll let you know how old I am, cash pay to checks. And guess what happened? They blew it and messed it up all the time. There was a grievance process. That's still there for these VA members. We need to make sure that those things can be looked into for them. But for oversight, that's a problem with this. It's so broad that now all of a sudden we are going to have an arbitrator involved with someone who may have had some kind of major error or continuing errors in providing medical services. That's not a good way to have it.
Well, let's talk about that arbitrator for a minute. That's my understanding. I just want to get in for the record. This person does not have to be a medical professional.
Does not have to be a medical professional. That does not say it in there.
And Mr. Boss, could you, again, please expand on your concerns that these reviews may not be by an expert in the field? Is that not required?
It's not required. That's the problem. There is, right now, it is required that somebody can appeal through a group of professionals, and then they would bring them from other VAs and go, this is why they were let go, and they can negotiate that out or say, was it justified? But this does not require some of those professionals to keep looking at that. And we're more than willing to look at this legislation, but this legislation, we moved it out of in May, and we haven't really had the chance to even staff to negotiate back and forth. What can we do? Bringing the groups together is what we're supposed to do in our committee, not come here at the last part of the year and all of a sudden, let's pull this forward and run with it.
And could you tell me expand on the real-world impact of the bill. How would changes make it more difficult for the VA secretary to complete the mission of providing veteran care?
Well, if a VA secretary, through his or her frontline people, usually a hospital administrator, sees a problem in the work of a doc, of a nurse, in their professional standing, and then they're let go, this would bring in, they would go and file a union grievance, and then they'd have to bring in the arbitrator that we're talking about. That arbitrator is not a medical professional about a medical professional issue. That's a problem. You know, I was a union firefighter, folks. I understand the importance of labor agreements and negotiation, but in this case, this has always been kind of a hands-off area, and especially in the VA.
Well, I think you made this point. This is not common in the private sector. Is there a model we can look at where something like this has been tried before?
No, and we're glad to look at that, but everything we talked to about Mayo Clinic and Pfizer and all the different ones that I named, the standard is they have a medical review board which is in the profession in which they are.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I certainly want to give you a chance to make any points you care to make.
Excuse me, Ranking Member Cole, I'm not sure what the ranking member is getting at, but my bill does not go to the discipline of, say, a doctor or a nurse for negligence or malpractice. That's a separate track. This bill is, my bill in terms of collective bargaining rights has more to do with grievances, such as, a miscalculation on pay or, some sort of error in overtime. The VA Accountability Act of 2017 was a very strong, aggressive bill, which gave VA enhanced authorities to discipline employees for bad actions. This bill does nothing to change what those authorities say. So look, the whole point is to be able to give medical expertise enhanced voice. That's what this bill would do. It's not about trying to, say that a third party is, an unqualified third party is going to interfere with the discipline of medical professionals. As to your concern about the departments not weighing in, let me just say the bill was introduced in March of 2021, and since that time, the committee has on numerous occasions sought views on the bill from both the Secretary and the Office of General Counsel to no avail. The Secretary has referenced vague concerns about emergency authority, but despite repeated requests, VA has not pointed to specific authorities that could be carved out from the legislation or ways that the text could be amended to address those concerns. The committee has been left to guess as to how to address these unknown concerns. To do so, the committee has included language that exempts emergency hiring authorities from the bill, and to date, VA has refused to comment on any revised language. So there's a very specific focus of how we're trying to include Title 38 employees. This does not impinge upon disciplining employees for malpractice, bad actions, negligence, et cetera, et cetera. This is about, I think, giving a few prospective employees a greater reason to actually to join the workforce at VA. And we do need to ramp up the hiring. We've got 3.5 million veterans, thanks to your vote, Mr. Cole, who are newly going to be eligible for VA health care. So anyway, that's my response.
Well, that actually, takes me to one of my concerns. I'll just make this quick and then move on. I don't mean to take too much time, Madam Chair. Because I did see you guys work really well together in the PACT Act and, move back and forth. And we had time in that case, and you got to the same place. And it made it much easier for me to be supportive of the bill, quite frankly, because I have a lot of faith in both of you, and I know your motives are good. And I have a large veterans population. My dad spent the last 12 years of his life in veterans home with Alzheimer's and got terrific care. And so I do take these things awfully seriously as to how it might impact care. And I know neither of you would deliberately do anything, but it does concern me when one, administration I know would be inclined, has not yet climbed on board, and two, we don't have a private sector model to look at that seems comparable to this, or another public sector thing. And I just, there's a lot of unintended consequences in legislation that's this sweeping. So I just flagged that as my concerns. But I appreciate both of you being here and appreciate your presentations. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks for your testimony. No questions.
Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Takano, I wanted to just further tease out this distinction you were making between what are collectively bargainable matters and then professional discipline, because doctors and nurses, of course, are not the only professionals who can be unionized and engage in collective bargaining, and teachers engage in collective bargaining, airline pilots engage in collective bargaining. All of them are also subject to professional licensing boards that can revoke their licenses if they engage in egregious misconduct, whether it's sexual harassment or rape or embezzling funds or whatever. None of that ever touches the collective bargaining process. In fact, unions are usually the first ones to say, deal with that as a matter of
professional discipline completely separate. As I understand it, Chairman Takano, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're talking about is just giving these medical professionals the same rights that other professionals at the VA have to engage in collective bargaining related to questions of peer review and compensation and so on.
That's correct. That's correct. And in fact, Ranking Member Cole, let me just point out that as you're looking for other models, a DOD nurse, as I point out in my comments, a DOD nurse has union representation. But we have prescribed by law that a VA nurse can't get representation. That makes no sense. I don't have any evidence that a unionized DOD nurse has caused DOD harm or has somehow, and in fact, Chairwoman Torres has mentioned the Kaiser nurses. I mean, Kaiser nurses have far more ability in terms of their collective bargaining objectives. They often go on strike for salary issues. This is a very limited set of things that we're talking about here. We're not talking about salary, we're not talking about benefits, and we're not talking about the ability to strike here.
So nurses in the DOD who are covered by collective bargaining are limited to discrete collective bargaining issues.
That's correct.
If a nurse were to go outside and say, administer poison to patients and kill them and and then are subject to professional discipline, that's completely outside of the collective bargaining process. It's got nothing to do with it. So I think that's an irrelevant distraction from what you're talking about doing. It's a red herring. I think this is excellent legislation, and to me, it seems like something that is really a very compelling argument that you're making.
And I would love to respond in the fact that it does include professional conduct or competence, peer review, and pay. So it is different than what you were talking about, because those are the issues we're talking about. We're not talking, if we want to go back to the drawing board and try to find out that spot where we can come to, like I said off the start, I'm not anti-union. I was a professional firefighter. Grandparents, everybody on my mom's side were United Mine Workers. That is a whole different story. But when we start talking about professionals, and we're talking about their professional conduct or competence, that's a problem. That's a problem, and you're taking the power away from that person, whether assigned by this president or another president, the ability to give oversight to the level that they need and bringing in an arbitrator that is not of that profession.
I would just offer the rejoinder. I point back to the 2017 Accountability Act, which was very aggressive in giving VA enhanced authorities to deal with professional conduct matters and the ability to dismiss employees with greater dispatch. And this bill does nothing to affect those enhanced authorities.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me if it's working for everybody else in the workforce, it can be working for them. And I don't know of any examples, maybe you have some examples where the collective bargaining rights of the workers somehow prevents people who are manifestly irresponsible, incompetent, criminal from being removed from the workforce. I just haven't heard of any of those.
Well, the thing is, we can, in our existing power right now as a committee, do the oversight we need of these professionals and still have them grieve through the process that we put in place through our laws, not in the process of a secondary person out there through the process.
Okay. Well, that's all I got, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Ms. Fishback. Mr. Morelli. Nobody else have anything? I'm sorry I'm late. You must have been fabulous if there's any questions.
We were.
So seeing that there's no other questions, you're free to go.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll look into that.
So without objection, the committee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair. The Rules Committee will come to order. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Desaulniers.
God. Thank you for the direction, Mr. Morelli. It's been a while. I move the committee grant H.R. 1948, the VA Employee Fairness Act of 2021, a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on the bill, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs or their designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 117-71 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of S. 3905, the Preventing Organizational Conflicts of Interest in Federal Acquisition Act under a closed rule. The rule provides an hour of general debate on the bill, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform or their designee. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to commit. The rule further provides for consideration of S. 4003, the Law Enforcement De-Escalation Training Act of 2022, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to commit. The rule provides House Resolution 1516 is hereby adopted. The rule provides that any time through the legislative day of December 15th, 2022, the Speaker may entertain motions offered by the Majority Leader or a designee that the House suspend the rules with respect to multiple measures that were the object of motions to suspend the rules on the legislative day of December 12th, December 13th, December 14th, or the 15th of 2022, on which the yeas and nays were ordered and further proceedings postponed. The chair shall put the question on any such motion without debate or intervening motion, and the ordering of the yeas and nays on postponed motions to suspend the rules with respect to such measures is vacated. The rule provides that proceedings may be postponed through December 15th, 2022, on measures that were the object of motions to suspend the rules on the legislative day of December 12th and on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The rule provides for the consideration of Senate Amendment H.R. 1437. The rule makes in order a motion offered by the chair of the Committee on Appropriations or her designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment with an amendment consisting of the text of Rules Committee print 117-72. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion. The rule provides the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of debate on the motion, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their designee. The rule provides that the House shall be considered to have taken from the Speaker's table H.R. 2006-17 with the Senate amendments thereto, to have concurred in the Senate amendments numbered 1, 2, 3, and 5, and to have concurred in the Senate amendment number 4 with an amendment consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 117-73. Finally, the rule provides the House concurrent resolution 124 as hereby adopted.
So before I yield to Mr. Cole for any comments or amendments, let me just do a little bit of explanation here. So in addition to the two bills that we heard testimony on today, this rule also provides for consideration of S. 4003, the Law Enforcement De-Escalation Training Act of 2022, which failed on suspension at the end of November. This important legislation directs the Department of Justice to develop trainings that include topics such as alternatives to the use of force, de-escalation tactics, and safely responding to an individual experiencing a mental, behavioral health, or suicidal crisis. I voted yes on the floor. I hope to see this on the President's desk as soon as possible, and so that's one thing. The rule also deems as adopted H-Res 1516, which approves regulations to implement provisions of the Congressional Accountability Act, specifically the FMLA regulations revise the definition of spouse to include same-sex couples, allow military families to use family and medical leave to care for service members and certain veterans, and implement the Federal Employee Paid Leave Act, which provides paid parental leave. The Fair Standards Act regulations update the test to determine overtime pay, which was last updated in 1996. And as you've heard, the rule also provides for a motion to concur in the Senate amendment to H.R. 1437 with the text of the one-week CR and provides 1 hour of debate for the motion to concur. Finally, the rule will send H.R. 2617 back to the Senate so they have an expedited vehicle to send us the omnibus before the deadline. Time is running out, and we should use every tool in our arsenal to keep the government running. So with that, I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take much time. I think I've said most of the things I had to say, but let me just make the obvious point that multiple closed rules and deeming items are not likely to attract much bipartisan support for the underlying legislation. So I regret that we're doing business this way, but we'll proceed down this road and see where we end up.
I thank you. Anybody else have anything to add? If not, the vote now occurs on the motion from the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
On that, Mr. Chairman, we would request a recorded vote.
Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Torres.
Aye.
Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter.
Yes.
Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Morelli. Aye. Mr. Morelli, aye. Mr. DeSaulnier. Aye. Mr. DeSaulnier, aye. Ms. Ross. Aye. Ms. Ross, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Cole.
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk, report the total.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
And the motion is agreed to. Mr. DeSaulnier will carry this for the majority.
And Mr. Rushenthaler will carry it for the Republicans.
All right. And so without objection, the committee is adjourned, but we're going to take a picture, so
Don't move.
don't move.